All right, just take a second. Picture this. The open roads, sun shining, maybe your favorite tunes playing, that excitement of heading somewhere new. What's your dream trip look like? Coastline drive, ancient cities, maybe just escaping to the mountains nearby. That feeling, the anticipation. This is kind of what we're diving into today. Because in this deep dive, we're doing more than just dreaming about travel. We're actually digging into a specific learning tool. It's an English learning podcast called Road Trip Planning in English, Future Tense Adventures. Woo! Our mission really is to unpack how this thing is built. How does it aim to take intermediate English learners and make them feel confident planning trips and talking about travel? And maybe more importantly, what can we learn from its design about mastering practical language skills?
Exactly. And for you listening in, this isn't just about planning a road trip in English. By looking closely at how this specific podcast is put together, you get this fantastic shortcut. You get to see how effective language learning works, how combining real-life situations with targeted grammar, specific vocabulary, how that actually builds fluency for a specific purpose. It's not just words, it's the whole structure of learning effectively, which you could apply anywhere, really.
Absolutely, like a blueprint for learning. Okay, so let's hit the road and see what makes this learning journey tick. Okay, so let's unpack this thing. The foundation of the whole learning experience in this podcast. It's built around a really simple but super relatable idea. You've got two characters, Alex and Sarah, and they're just, planning their road trip. It immediately feels less like a formal lesson and more like you're listening in on a real conversation.
Mm-hmm. And what's really quite clever there is how that immediate immersion works in your brain. It's a strong anchor. Instead of just throwing abstract grammar rules at you, the podcast uses this technique sometimes called narrative transportation. So when you hear Alex and Sarah talking about their plans, you're not just processing words, you're almost stepping into their story, right? Yeah. It engages your imagination, maybe even your emotions a bit. And that makes the language far more memorable. It sticks because it's tied to something vivid, something concrete. It's like learning by doing, but, virtually.
Yeah, that clicks because they're doing exactly what we all do when we plan a trip. They're choosing where to go, saying things like, we'll drive to the mountains. That sounds natural. They're figuring out the schedule. We will leave on Friday morning, or we're going to stop halfway for lunch. Mm-hmm. And they even get into the packing details like needing jackets or, hey, don't forget the camera.
Yeah.
That real context, it doesn't just make the language feel useful immediately.
Right.
It also seems like it would make it easier to process, less mental effort.
Exactly right. It lowers the cognitive load, as they say, and it tackles a big hurdle in language learning head on. How do you take rules from a book and actually use them? By putting the grammar, the vocabulary, right into a purposeful conversation. The podcast helps you transfer that knowledge. You're not just memorizing definitions, you're seeing how language works when people are making decisions together. And that's crucial for using it yourself later. It builds an intuition for the language, not just repeating things.
Okay, now the grammar focus. This is where I think the deep dive gets really interesting for anyone trying to nail English for travel. It's that difference between will and going to for the future tense. That's a classic sticking point, isn't it? What's like the most common way people get tripped up by that in a normal conversation?
Oh, that's a great question. It's subtle, but it really affects how you sound. I think a common mistake is just defaulting to one or not quite getting the timing right. People often mix up will for decisions made right now, spontaneously,
okay,
versus going to for plans you've already made beforehand. Like if you're at a cafe and suddenly decide, oh, I will have the cake, that's different from saying, next Tuesday, I'm going to see the dentist. That's a prior plan. And the podcast apparently makes this distinction clear. Will, for those spontaneous choices, offers maybe predictions.
Right.
And going to, for intentions, for plans, already in your head.
Okay, so it's about when you decided or how firm the plan is, not just future. Mm-hmm. That clears things up a lot. And the examples they use with Alex and Sarah seem to really highlight this. You hear, we will leave on Friday. Sounds like they're deciding it as they speak.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're going to stop at a hotel that feels like part of the plan they already had in mind.
Precisely.
And other bits like, we'll visit some famous places, or asking, where will we go? Yeah. And deciding we'll drive to the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Getting that difference right, spontaneous versus planned, that must make a huge difference in sounding confident, not hesitant.
It absolutely does. And if you think about clear communication, getting this right is pretty important. Using the wrong one might just sound a bit off, or in some cases, it could actually confuse things. Like imagine saying, I will meet you at 8, if you actually meant, I am going to meet you at 8. The first sounds a bit like a sudden promise, maybe less certain. The second sounds like a definite arrangement.
Right, conveys a different level of commitment.
Exactly. So the podcast, through this scenario, gives you what we call comprehensible input. It's language you can understand, but it's maybe just a little bit challenging, and it's delivered in context. That's key for really absorbing it. So it's not just grammar rules. It's about communicating clearly, avoiding misunderstandings when you're making your actual travel plans.
Okay, so grammar's covered. But a road trip also needs its own set of words, right? A specific vocabulary. And this podcast seems to handle that really smartly too, weaving the words right into the conversation, not just giving you a list.
Yeah, and that's so important. The words aren't just presented, they're embedded in the story. That's way more effective for actually remembering them long term than just, memorizing flashcards. And what's quite neat is how it helps you pick up on collocations, words that naturally go together in English.
Like word partners.
Exactly. You don't just learn rental, you rent a car. Or you don't just learn gas station, you fill up with gas. These little clusters of words they're vital for sounding natural when you speak.
Oh, I know that feeling. I remember trying to explain in really basic French once that my car needed repairing instead of just asking for a garage or mécanicien. Didn't quite land.
Yeah.
So this podcast helps you absorb words like map, route, car rental, gas station, luggage, hotel, reservation. Not just as single items. They're part of the flow. When Alex and Sarah talk about packing, they mention needing jackets or don't forget the camera. Oh, these aren't just abstract terms. They're tied to the actual doing of planning a trip.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that contextual learning helps you, the listener, absorb these new words within meaningful chunks, within phrases, which makes them so much easier to remember and, crucially, to use later in your own chats, because you've linked them to a situation, maybe a mental image, an emotion, not just a definition. This approach helps build a stronger active vocabulary, the words you can actually pull out and use, not just the ones you kind of recognize. Much better for the real world.
Okay, so the setup is great, the vocabulary learning makes sense, but what really elevates this, maybe, is how it teaches, not just what it teaches. It's not just about listening passively, is it?
No, not at all. The source material points out some key teaching strategies, things like clear dialogue spoken at a moderate pace with explanations built in. It highlights specific vocabulary. And there's that strong grammar focus on will versus going to. These are all solid foundations for a good language lesson, making sure the input is understandable.
Right. But the really interesting part, the bit that ties into the architecture of learning, is the active participation element. It's not just listening. They have this mini speaking challenge or mini role play challenge. They actually tell listeners, practice making your own road trip plan in English. And this seems important. Repeat the phrases out loud. So what does getting the listener to do something actually achieve for learning? Why is that better than just listening?
Well, that taps into something called the testing effect or retrieval practice. Loads of research shows that actively trying to recall information or trying to produce the language yourself is much, much more effective for long-term memory than just passively reviewing it.
Like quizzing yourself versus just rereading notes.
Exactly like that.
Oh.
When you force yourself to pull that word or phrase out of your memory or to build your own sentence, you're actually strengthening the neural connections. It shifts you from just consuming information to actively creating with it.
Yeah.
There's a theory called the output hypothesis that suggests this production is vital for really mastering a language.
Interesting.
It's not just what goes in, it's what you manage to get out. So by asking you to repeat things and then to make your own plans, the podcast gets you practicing pronunciation, trying out sentence structures, and really cementing those new language patterns. That active part is absolutely critical for building real fluency and, importantly, confidence. The overall goal seems very clear. Help intermediate folks get better at travel English by practicing those future tenses and learning key words for planning trips. It's practical, and it's grounded in how learning actually works best.
Wow. Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive into this road trip planning in English podcast.
Yeah.
It's been pretty illuminating, actually. We've seen how a really well-designed learning resource uses these relatable real-world situations, provides super clear explanations for tricky grammar, like those future tenses, and maybe most crucially, it cleverly builds in active practice based on, well, how our brains learn best. It's not just teaching words, it's giving you the framework and the confidence to actually use them effectively when you travel.
Absolutely, and this whole deep dive It gives you that shortcut we talked about. You get to see the design principles behind effective learning content laid bare. It really highlights that context, clear instruction, making things easy to process mentally, and giving opportunities for active recall and practice. Those things are essential. And that applies way beyond just learning English for a road trip. It's about how to structure any kind of effective learning.
Right. Which brings us to that final thought for you to chew on. How could you take these design principles we've just unpacked using a relatable scenario, breaking down complex stuff into simple, usable pieces and pushing for active, hands-on practice? How could you apply that to learning or teaching something else entirely? Maybe it's getting better at a piece of software or finally mastering that tricky cooking technique or even planning a project at work. What everyday situation could you turn into a powerful learning opportunity using these ideas? Something to think about as you plan your next adventure, whatever that might be.